Welcome back. Let's turn to Scotland, where there's been a week of high drama despite no local elections actually taking place. Though that could be about to change. John Swinney is currently the front runner to replace Humza Yousaf as leader of the SNP and the next First Minister of Scotland. But there are reports this morning of a possible leadership rival. So Mr Swinney could face a leadership contest rather than a coronation. He joins me now. Good morning, Mr Swinney.
Good morning, Trevor.
First of all, what can you tell us about the possibility of this leadership challenge? I assume that they won't come to you directly, but is that still a possibility as far as you know?
The process that we go through is a democratic process. Nominations for the party leadership vacancy close tomorrow at noon. My nomination is in, it's been accepted by the party secretary, but obviously there is the facility for any party member to stand if they can get the requisite 100 signatures from 20 local organisations around the country. And so we'll know the answer to that question tomorrow. If there is one candidate that's nominated tomorrow, then I will be elected as party leader. If there's more than one, then we'll have a contest which will stretch over a 3-week period.
I know it would obviously be wrong for you to discourage any other party member to participate in democracy, but a leadership contest would not be a good thing for the SNP, would it?
I think where we are just now is that my bid to become SNP leader has received very, very comprehensive support within the SNP. I set out a message which is about unifying the SNP, to strengthen our party and to win Scottish independence. I think that's necessary because the SNP is not as cohesive today as the party needs to be. And my campaign has attracted very wide support, but especially it's attracted the support and endorsement of Kate Forbes, who contested the leadership 12 months ago. And I really welcome that. So I think the SNP's got a chance to start rebuilding from the difficult period that we have had under my leadership. And bluntly, I'd just like to sort of get on with that as quickly as I possibly can do, because every day that we spend in an internal contest, which I think we all probably know the outcome of, we delay the ability for the SNP to start its rebuilding, and I want to get on with that as quickly as I possibly can do.
Thank you for that very frank answer, which I am going to summarise as a message to any potential contenders, which is don't. Let's talk about what your predecessor, Humza Yousaf, said, that if the SNP won a majority of seats at the next general elections, that would be a mandate for another independence referendum. Is that your view too?
My view is that we've got to recognise that we've got to build further support for Scottish independence. Independence is supported now by more people than supported it in 2014 in the last referendum. But it's not supported by enough people for it to be a compelling proposition within Scotland. So what I think our priority has got to be is to spend less time discussing the mechanics and the thresholds about independence, but to start winning the arguments about why independence is an absolute necessity for people in Scotland. And let me give you a couple of examples about why that is the case. The cost of living crisis, which is affecting people, every household in Scotland, is a product of Westminster decision-making, the folly of the Liz Truss budget, which has increased housing costs for families the length and breadth of Scotland. That is a decision of Westminster, which is an argument for Scotland taking better decisions in our own hands. The Tory-imposed Brexit, which we never voted for in Scotland, is causing huge damage to businesses and individuals in Scotland. That's a decision we could have avoided had we been an independent country. So these are some of the arguments I want to make to patiently persuade people of the merits of independence. These are the arguments that will convince people, and I think that's where we've got to concentrate our efforts.
I understand that, but what I am taking from what you're saying, is it, or would it be unfair to take from what you're saying that still set on independence, but you think that competence in the Scottish government has to come before the next independence referendum. Convincing Scottish people that the SNP can be trusted in government will come before any next referendum.
I think there's two things, Trevor. You're right in most of that. I think there's got to be confidence in the SNP government in its delivery on the priorities that matter to people in Scotland. And for me, those are centred around the delivery of economic growth and social justice, the eradication of curses like child poverty within our society. But then also there has to be confidence in the arguments for independence. And that's where I think we've got work to do, and we've got work to do on both fronts, to be honest. And that's why I've re-entered the fray. I stood down a year ago as Deputy First Minister because I felt I had had a long time in government and it was time for other faces to come in. My party faces difficulties now, and I think it's time for me to come back in, bring the party together and make the positive arguments for an SNP government and for independence.
In bringing the party together, you have united with Kate Ford. What job are you going to offer her?
Obviously, we're getting a wee bit ahead of ourselves, Trevor. These things will come should I be elected as First Minister.
You and she must have spoken.
As your first question said to me, there's a couple of hurdles we've got to get over before we get to that. Kate and I have spoken, of course we have. I really welcome her support. I think she's got an important contribution to make to the national life of Scotland. And I've made it clear that she will have a significant role within any government that I have the privilege to lead.
All right, let's say that you do become the head of Scotland's government. One of the things you're going to have to deal with in the next 9 months is the general election across the United Kingdom. If you have a choice, Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer?
Well, I certainly think a Labour government would be preferable to the awful, disastrous, terrible Conservative government that we have in place. So these are, in that choice, then I recognise a Labour government will be better than a Conservative government. But that's not the question that people in Scotland face.
Can I just put it to you that I spoke to Pat McFadden, who you know very well, and I asked him, would he be up for an arrangement with the SNP? And he replied in a way that I think you will recognise from Pat McFadden with one word: no.
Well, Pat, I know Pat well. Pat and I are old university buddies from the University of Edinburgh a lifetime ago. So I don't think Pat's public line to you is something that he would sustain in a decent conversation with me or with others. But look, what we have to recognise is that the public have got to be given their choice. I think they'll have that choice in the general election. The general election is due to take place between now and about the end of the year. And what the argument I'll make to people in Scotland is that we've got to make sure Scotland's interests are well protected by the election of a strong group of SNP members of Parliament. That's Scotland's protection against either a Conservative government that's been hostile to Scotland unreservedly or a Labour government that's got the habit of disappointing people. And I want to make sure people in Scotland realise that the best way to protect Scotland and to deliver for Scotland's interests is by voting SNP in the general election.
Last question, Mr Swinney. The biggest, strongest signal that you could send to the Scottish people about how you are going to govern would be how you deal with the Gender Recognition Act that Holyrood passed but was essentially blocked by Westminster government, and that action was declared lawful by the Scottish court. So what are you going to do? Are you going to put that act on ice, forget about it? Are you going to try to amend it? What is your plan? Are you going to pursue that, what people call a cultural war issue, or are you now going to put it to one side?
I think I don't accept the premise of your question, Trevor, and let me explain why. You said to me that the biggest issue I could signal to the people of Scotland is how I handle this particular issue. I think the biggest thing I can signal to the people of Scotland is that I want to become the First Minister of Scotland so that we can concentrate on delivering economic growth and social justice for the people of Scotland, and that we can make Scotland a more successful country that can become an independent country. That is my driving, compelling proposition. And
putting that act into implementation would be a signal. Will you or won't you?
Well, what I'm saying is that I've set out what my priorities would be. Those are the driving priorities for me if I become the First Minister of Scotland. There are issues I've got to consider about gender reform. The issue, you're correct that the legislation cannot be put into force because of the legal judgments that have been made. I believe in the rule of law, so I accept the decisions of courts in that respect. And we have to consider what are the best steps to take forward. But what I've assured everybody about is that I believe in a good, solid process of respectful dialogue about these issues. We need more respectful dialogue about these processes, and we've got to make sure that we handle those issues with care and sensitivity, and that's what I'll bring to those discussions.
Mr. Swinney, thank you so much for your time this morning.
My pleasure.